Should I start with hello world?
Yes.
Welcome to the Omaha Ruby Meetup. Thanks so much for coming tonight. Big announcement that you might have seen in your inbox already. A call for organizers. We've had to say fond farewell to a couple organizers so far. It's Carl and Lindsay. Thank you so much, Carl. Lindsay, if you're watching, you're missed. But looking for a couple more people on the organizing committee, people that can make being here a priority. A big part of the organizer responsibility is also helping find speakers and coordinating with people on topics and maintaining relevant topics, and so listening to the members and what's going on in our community. And so talk to Andy or I later if you're interested. Want to get started by thanking our sponsors. Thanks to Unabridged, Agape Red, and Flywheel. Thanks so much for being sponsors to them. And then first up, Adam, how are you doing, bud? Or Will, never mind. Just kidding. Excellent. Will Riley. Up to bat, Will's talk tonight is called Introduction to Stencil. We're going to hear how Will uses Stencil to do custom HTML tags for Flywheel's making bot. Will.
Thank you, Michael, for that wonderful intro. Okay, so give me a moment to get set up. I have to scroll all the way over here, and then click on this, and then click on this. Okay. Hi everybody, I'm William Riley. Today I'm here to talk about something I highly recommend using. I've been using it at Flywheel, using it in places, and also using it at side projects, and redoing the new Tech Omaha site with this product. Library, compiler, and that is Stencil. So I'm going to cover the reasons why you use a tool like this, the good parts, the bad parts, and if I have time, I'm going to make a component and talk through my process, my thought process. Personally, I'm really interested in the process sides of these kinds of things, but I do know that like coding can be the like inventory management of a kind of technical talk, so it's not very fun. But I'm going to do my best to make it fun and engaging. And then after the live coding segment, we're going to do some Q&A. So don't hesitate to ask any questions that you feel are dumb or that you maybe like challenge me in any way. But with that being said, please, if you do have any questions during this, write them down so that we can come back to them at any point. So, Stencil. Here's their logo. It's really beautiful. Stencil is an open source project maintained by Ionic. Ionic does cross-platform tools to make it dead simple to launch and maintain any application. And Stencil is a project of theirs that sets out to create custom HTML elements. It's an alternative to Webpack in a lot of ways. It is a web component compiler, which is important. So, an important question to ask is, why would you need to use a tool like Stencil in the real world? And the answer turns out to be two separate but totally related things. First and foremost, a tool like this helps you reason about your front-end code. Everyone has worked on a project before that uses HTML and CSS and JavaScript. You use those things to do good UI work, deal with accessibility, deal with performance, deal with making sure that your design is totally up to spec with what your designer wants. And a good, simple, relatable example could be, I hope, a tabs experience. That, you know, when you click the tab, it switches a big area block of content. Pretty simple. So this is an example of tabs in Bootstrap. Part of me wants to zoom that in. Can you see that pretty well, everybody? Cool.
I'm okay.
So this is what it looks like in Bootstrap. As you can see, there are classes that explain the style on the element. There's a part of me that actually wants like a laser pointer. But those are classes inside of the div that's inside of this nav HTML element. Classes on the anchor tag. Classes on the below div, the div below the nav element, and then all of the classes inside of the tab content below. That's a lot of style that's being explained inside of classes, and it's kind of heavy, and you have to remember all of that stuff. That kind of sucks. There are also classes that explain the state on the element. So when you have an active tab, both on the tab itself, you have a class that says active, and you have a class on the tab pane itself, the content that you clicked, that says active. These are two totally separate already things that are explaining style and behavior inside of the same attribute. That's kind of annoying. And it's kind of confusing, not annoying, but it's confusing, and it's hard to decipher what's responsible for what. Even classes set to dictate behavior on how tabs transition. So there's animation and user experience stuff inside of the class, and it's not like sort of split out to have single responsibilities. So inside of this tab pane underneath at the very bottom, you have tab content, and then one of the tab panes, each of them have tab pane space fade. Each have fade. That is explaining the behavior of fading in, so that the experience isn't totally jarring. Actually, as a matter of fact, I think it might have a video, right? Is it going to play? Yeah, cool. So that's what's going on. There's more. There's an ID set on the div, tabs div that helps Bootstrap target and maintain behavior on this particular piece of UI. There are roles attribute set, which means you need to remember to maintain accessibility standards on all your HTML when you copy and paste this component around. It's kind of annoying. It's hard to remember, and oftentimes it falls off. There's a data toggle attribute set on the div with a class of .tab item that targets the div with a class of .tab pane below. Oh my god, that was a lot to communicate. So there's a lot going on here to accomplish something that you would think is pretty straightforward. So let's look at an example of tabs with web components. So here's an example of what web components and more semantic tabs code looks like. This is an example of Chrome tabs that I screen capped from webcomponents.org. Fantastic resource for looking into different kinds of web components. So what's happening here is you have an HTML element called Chrome tabs, plural, Chrome tabs at the tippy top. And it may contain multiple tabs, singular. Chrome tab, and then you have your title, and then you have your name. And your name is associated with the tab below, the Chrome tab content singular below. So you've got a Chrome tab that's named title, and then you've got a Chrome tab content that's associated to the Chrome tab for title. The great part is that that English that I just said is English, and it makes sense, and it's sort of visually you can start to understand what's happening. The even better part is that all of the accessibility, behavior, style, and other oddities, frankly, are set inside of the declaration for this HTML element. So you don't have to remember to do that stuff. You just declare that you have a Chrome tab and that you have a Chrome tab content. And so that really helps you move faster, have a lot of velocity, make more maintainable code, and remember how to use these things. Because with a div, clearly you can do literally everything. This sort of guides you. All style is stored inside of the tab, so you don't have to remember to write all those classes. All behavior is stored inside of that element, so you don't have to remember all those IDs, those data toggle attributes. It's a very simple for and name, just like how you do inputs and labels in standard HTML. So that's really nice. This helps me understand what to do. So it helps you maintain your front-end code. As a piece of UI or specific features needs grow, it becomes harder and harder to add new features, or improve existing ones, or deprecate old ones, and ultimately remove them. So that's what Stencil and all all of these other tools let you do. First one is React, second one is Polymer, third one is Chew. A little training over there. I adore Chew. The engineer who works on Chew is like the nicest, kindest person on earth. Then we've got Dojo. We've got Vue, Skate, yeah, and then React. And all these tools exist to help you organize your code and set you up to create, expand, remove, or deploy features so much faster. All these tools over the last half year, more than that, last year and a half, I've been evaluating and playing around with, trying to understand what they do, how they organize things, what their opinions are, and things like this. And it got to the point for me recently, probably about 3-4 months ago now, that I was playing too much, and I needed to make a decision. So I made a spreadsheet with the results of all of those things. Different metrics were like maintainability, speed, quality, browser compatibility, accessibility, design, build process, etc. And that spreadsheet and the results allowed me to land on using Stencil. With React is going to be my second choice when I need something to sort of manage and play with state. But ultimately, for you, this decision doesn't matter. Because whatever you decide on, all of these tools help you do your job better. There's no wrong decision here at all. I just need to say this because like front end is weird and everybody gets like really strong opinions about these kinds of things. But it doesn't matter what you use, they all help you write great code. But I want to explain why I decided to land on Stencil. So, helps you do your job better. So we're going to get into it. Now that all of that is out of the way, let's look at what Stencil does, where it falls short, and what it means to be a web component compiler. So, we're going to dig into features. I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to try to go through this relatively quickly. We're 10 minutes in. I'm going to try to cap this at 20. See what I can do. So, it provides a virtual DOM. Virtual DOM is great because it lets you manage DOM updates and update DOM in a batch. This is a massive performance win. It does async rendering, which is something that's going to be happening in React 16.2, I believe. And that's great because it lets you sort of but unclog the UI thread. That JavaScript only has one single UI thread, so that's really cool because it defers a lot of work and lets great stuff happen in your UI quickly. Finally, actually, there's a lot more. It offers one-way reactive binding, so that if you edit the attribute on your HTML, you don't have to write anything to pass that new value into your template or run a function against the new value. It goes in, nothing can go out. Not nothing, but generally the idea is nothing can go out. Or rather, data down, events up. That's the idea also behind React. So, fourth, it offers TypeScript, which is great because you get typing, you sort of solves a lot of your testing problems while you're writing, which is super, super fantastic, and it's one of the things that, for me professionally, has made sure that I'm writing great code. It offers JSX, which is a great way of turning seemingly simple HTML into an object that you can do a lot of great stuff with. And you can do a lot of great stuff with JSX. I sort of also have opinions on it, but at the same time, it is a super, super helpful tool. It lazy loads components, it being Stencil. And so what this means is when you write an HTML tag, it loads the JavaScript file for that HTML tag on demand, and then it mounts it. And not only that, it loads either an ES6 modern JavaScript bundle or an ES5 larger bundle. So it's really fantastic because it makes sure that you're either using fast modern code or slow, code for, not slow actually, but code for that browser. It builds a service worker by using Workbox. Workbox is a product by Google that lets you that helps you write great PWAs, progressive web apps. And those let you do a lot of very cool things, and the feature set that they offer continues to expand. But PWAs are effectively websites that are treated as apps. You can even send push notifications from them, which is really cool. And they're also coming to Safari, probably next release, considering how quickly it's going, which means that you won't have to package your website into a Cordova app and then ship that in the App Store. You actually just say add to home screen, and now there's finally value in that add to home screen little button. It offers unit testing with Jest. Jest is awesome because it's got JavaScript DOM. It's not perfect because it's got JavaScript DOM, but or JS DOM rather, which is a library that tries to act like DOM in the browser. But the browser moves faster than it, so there's some challenges there. They're switching this to use Puppeteer, which is going to be more valuable for sure. It offers ES6 browser modules, which is cool and ridiculously valuable because it reduces more the code that Stencil is sort of responsible for. It uses the import and export keywords, which is great. Just like bar is a keyword, it offers those. And that's fantastic because you don't have to deal with bundling anymore, and this is why it kind of gets rid of the need for Webpack. Oh, then it offers my favorite thing, CSS custom properties, aka variables. This is fantastic for me because there's a lot of cool stuff. If I have the time, I'll show you. But basically, it lets you write like a CSS rule that you can apply all the way down. And it cascades, and you can also update that. It's one of the best features in CSS. It's a great tool. And finally, speaking of which, Shadow DOM. Shadow DOM with Stencil is cool, and it's actually super simple to declare. Stencil provides a dead simple way of making your web component compile with Shadow DOM. And this helps ensure that CSS from the page doesn't actually leak into your component, which is a really big help for a lot of different reasons. So if you want to ship something that doesn't break in all browsers, and it's scoped, the style is scoped to that little web component, you've got Shadow DOM, and that helps you make stuff good. Sorry, moving on. Let's move on to advantages. So first of all, no need for Webpack, thank God. Webpack is hard. It can turn into like a pain in the butt. It's a compiler, just like Webpack, so it produces plain, simple, compatible, considerate JavaScript. There's no need to write and dependency inject your polyfills. It elegantly falls back without you ever needing to think about it, unless you write features that aren't cross-browser compatible that Stencil doesn't already polyfill. Then you need to be mindful of what those are. You can publish it on NPM and distribute your version code through Unpackage in a surprisingly easy way, which is very cool. And I'll have more on that soon. I'm actually working on a design system that's going to take advantage of this. There is no need to dig through CSS, HTML, or JavaScript files to understand if a feature exists on a piece of UI, which is really handy because sometimes you have to dig around and you have to search for something that it turns out was deleted. And that's never good to discover. The interface with Stencil is ridiculously tiny. There's only 5 JavaScript decorators that you'll often use, which is @component, @prop, @state, @watch, and @method. And then there's 3 others that let you handle events, which is @event, event emitter, and then @listen. So super tiny interface with Stencil. The documentation is amazing. It's really, really good. It's the best documentation I've ever used, and it's what really sold me on the tool because, if anything, even TypeScript They have great documentation there. Stencil has fantastic documentation as well. And it's really documentation that makes a tool successful. And then it's got type checking with TypeScript. And so you can catch errors before the code is sent to customers. And that's built into Stencil. So you don't have to think about setting it up. And setting it up with React has been historically sort of frustrating for me because they want you to use Flow, but I don't want to use Flow because it's a Facebook product. So that is it for advantages. Let's chat pitfalls really quick, and then I'll hit my 20-minute mark. So it's JavaScript. As Rubyers, you probably don't like JavaScript, and that's okay. I like JavaScript. I wrote here, and this is in the script, I work with Michael Harold, who is adamantly against JavaScript. And I'm, in a sense, that yin to his yang. But frankly, it doesn't matter too much that it's JavaScript these days. These cannot render to Sketch, which is actually a bunch of baloney, because I figured it out recently. So React can render components to Sketch, and that's a great design process and workflow. Sorry. I don't want to like breathe into the mic, so I'm like, for some reason my mental whatever is whatever. Anyways, so React can render components to Sketch, and that's a great design process and workflow for your designers, so you can collaborate really well. But unfortunately, vanilla web components cannot render to Sketch. Again, this is actually bullshit because I just figured it out. If I could, I would literally delete this right now. It's a new way to think if you come from typical HTML, BEM, and JS. BEM for your CSS, which is block element modifier. If you came from the good old days of using these things, these tools don't invalidate these methodologies at all. They actually use quite a lot of parts in them. I use BEM inside of the component, but at face value, it seems to supersede them. They don't. They work together really well. And you may have to unlearn some things if you're using Shadow DOM. That's the only thing, actually, to consider. Those are the pitfalls, which again, now there's only 2 instead of 3. I totally delete that sketch one. With all that information, let's talk about what these 3 words mean. Web Component Compiler, because Stencil isn't a library like React or Preact or Polymer or Backbone or Angular, etc., etc. It is a compiler. It compiles down to simple, dare I say, elegant JavaScript. Wait for transition. The result of the compile produces almost no stencil-specific code. The only thing that's considered library-specific in Stencil, in the code that Stencil produces, is the JSX and DOM diffing, which is going to be replaced with a good template solution once that comes around in the standard. So the code you download is your application code, and that is pretty exciting. So let's make a component, specifically a button. Stuff all covered, project structure, writing JSX, ifs and loops in JSX. Decorators available, what decorators you have available rather. Shadow DOM, CSS variables, dependency injection, ES6 modules, examples. Writing and running tests, publishing a component, using it in Webpack. And that's everything, and then I'll do Q&A. We are at 22 minutes. Do you want me to do it or no? How is everybody feeling? Live code session?
I'll go either way, but I'm okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm great.
I'm gonna try to do it. I'm gonna try to do it in 8 minutes. All right. The thing is, like, I can still hear me breathing in the mic, so like, it's weird because, yeah, it's so strange. Yeah, exactly.
Sounds fine up front.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. So we're gonna open Sublime, and then we're gonna open Chrome. I'm going to close my flywheel code. Jesus. Right. Enter the stencil. it, I throw it away. Oh god. Oh geez, I threw it away. That sucks. Okay, well, we're gonna check it out really quick. I have internet, so let's go to Stencil. Cool. We're going to clone this repo. It's a stencil component starter, and what this has inside of it, make it larger. Thanks, man. And what this has inside of it is just a starter kit for making a great web component. And it's pretty dead simple, you'll see in a moment. But I'm going to run these commands really quick. We're just going to do it here. Nice. CD nice. Okay. I'm gonna call it. Installing everything from npm. Open that, start it. It kicks off a browser session inside of, or a server for the development server. And then, hello world, I'm Stencil, don't call me a framework, JS. So, what I want to do is I want to come up in this directory, I want to come over to Sublime Text, make sure that that's open, fantastic. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to beef up the text because I know that people cannot read this. Is that better? 18? Okay, cool. So, first what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on Finder. Unfortunately, browsers or operating systems can't let you like sort of zoom in. I think it's, what is it? Is it like this? There we go. So,
No.
oh,
You lost it.
I see what's happening. There we go. Okay, so this is that folder that we downloaded. In it, we've got some directories. So we're going to talk about project structure first. Dist are the result of a build, and so this is the thing that you would pull from to render your or to use a script tag to be able to take advantage of the web components that you're creating. Node modules is all the node modules that you've downloaded. Source is where we're going to be editing our code, and then www is for the development server. Let's look at source. So inside of source, you have a folder. You have a definitions file for TypeScript. This is auto-generated, so every component inside of this creates or allows you to have the definitions for the components that are inside of here, so that you can really take advantage of TypeScript. And then you have an index.html file, which we'll look at in a moment. It's really tiny. It's just a script tag and the declaration of the web component. And then some extra stuff that I don't really take advantage of this index.ts file. I don't know why it's there, I'm going to be frank with you, but I don't use it. Then we have our folder components, and inside of it we have a folder for each component. And so you could duplicate. You could duplicate this and create, continue to create different components that you need in a variety of different ways. So you can have a button, and then you could have a card, and then you could have a what's another avatar? What's another type of UI?
Slider.
Slider. You have a slide. Oops. A slide single. And then you can continue to do this, and this is effectively what makes a great component library. And inside of each of these folders is your the definitions of your components. So this one is my component. We are going to focus on particularly a button. We're going to make a button. So what I'm going to do is go back to that. That's terrible. Cool. We're going to focus on a button. And so we're going to rename all of our files to button. And then in it, we'll change some stuff. So this is the project structure, generally. Pretty straightforward. Inside of Sublime Text now, we're going to zoom out. So we're going into source, we're going into components, and then we're going into our button. So the first thing that we're going to focus on is updating some stuff inside of here. We've got our button CSS on the left, and then we're going to have a definition on the, or I apologize, the definition of the component on the left and the CSS on the right. So this is our button. We're going to rename it really quick from my component, and we're going to just call it a button. Then what we're going to do is we're going to change the HTML tag we use to define it. Inside of component, you pass an object, and that has 2 or 3 key value pairs. So shadow says, hey, I want this component to be mounted as a shadow DOM, We're not going to touch that yet.
Can you make that just a little bit bigger?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry.
Awesome.
Is that good?
Yep.
Thank you. So, my component is going to be renamed to Split Infinity's button. And so what this means is when I declare that HTML element, I do Split Infinity's button. Make sense?
Okay.
Beautiful. All right. So we're going to say color. We're not going to have a property of anything. We're just going to give it a color. And then so we'll say class equals color, rather this dot color. And then we're going to use something called the slot element. And then we're going to give this some default content, which is nice. Okay, so for now, since we're not using Shadow DOM, we're going to say button, or I apologize, Split Infinity's button. I really do wish I was using prettier. Nick Nisi started using it and he gushed about it today. We're going to say, oh, it's just CSS, right? I forgot, they recently did that. Color equals blue. Then the background is going to be blue. And this is a super simple, relatively contrived example, but I certainly use these kinds of things. And then we're also going to have red, and then our default color is going to be green. Red. Okay, so this is the button as it stands. Let's go into our index.html file. So over here, text size isn't letting me wrap. So what we've got is a simple index.html that has a head tag, grade, has a title, everything that's totally normal, totally useful. Then we have a script tag that says build mycomponent.js. This includes that JavaScript that Stencil creates. And then inside of our body we have my component. So like we said, we're going to do p, oops. Button, and we're going to get rid of this, and then we're not going to pass any content, slotted content inside of that button. So let's go over to Chrome. Make sure that this is actually working. Stencil says no such file. Oh, the style URL is simply button.css, but the name of the tag is Split Infinity's button. So come back up here, we got a nice button, pretty cool, in my opinion. So we're gonna display block, because it needs to be display block. There we go. It's a terrible button. Very big. But the great part is that this is the declaration of our button. So we can come into the Chrome console. I am going to beat this up. We come into the Chrome console, and we can see that our body is a Split Infinity's button. We can change the color to blue, and it it changes the background to blue. Inside we have our div that has that class of blue, and then our copy nice. We can also, if we wanted to, say, very good, pass stuff into it, and then that updates the content to very good, which is fantastical. You can always color red, there you go. And that is effectively a very contrived example of declaring a web component that is built with Stencil. And then also taking advantage of some attribute stuff. Let's see, what could be next? We could hit on, this is going to be a choose your own adventure. Do you want to do ifs and loops in JSX, Shadow DOM, and how to deal with Shadow DOM, or work with Shadow DOM rather, or dependency injection? Which would you like to see?
Shadow DOM.
Type.
Yeah.
All right.
10 points.
Alright, see how this is like typical, normal? You got your HTML split infinities button, and then you've got your div, and then some content, this weird little comment that can be deleted, that doesn't matter. What we're going to do over here is we're going to add shadow true. Alright, so now it creates and mounts something called a shadow DOM, or a shadow root, into this button. This means that no CSS can get in and no CSS can get out. I cannot do document.query selector split infinities button. Inside of it, all we have is our shadow root. There's a div here that you can see, and then there's slotted content. I can't actually get that div, so I can't do .query selector and then ask for that div. It returns nothing. Same exact example without Shadow DOM would result in that div, as you can see. However, we have Shadow DOM now, so we are actually taking advantage of the browser setting some scopes. And Shadow DOM has actually existed since like 1998, when you started using, well, not 1998, let me think, sorry. Because input tags, they also take advantage of Shadow DOM. It's just the browser vendors finally said, hey, here you go. It's actually 2009 when things started happening with HTML5 and the video tag, when Shadow DOM became something that was really interesting. And there's a lot of content, a lot of detail on what Shadow DOM can do and will do for us in the future, but for now, it's just very low-level CSS scoping. So let's look at the CSS, because right now, our background isn't actually working anymore. That idea of color equals blue, red, or green at default, blue, and then red. It's actually not rendering that background color. So what's going on there? So it turns out when you're, go away. When you are styling a component with Shadow DOM, you actually want to be targeting, what happens is inside of your shadow root, you have a style tag, and inside of the style tag, it actually begins to style the HTML that's inside of that shadow root. But the challenge is, it doesn't have split infinities button inside of the shadow root. That's above it. It's a parent. So what we're going to do is we're going to say the host element, host, it's a new CSS selector that looks at the Shadow DOM's host of this current element. Now you've got your green. That's really exciting. Color equals red. Oh, that's because our div has the class of red. So we're going to get rid of this specific attribute selector, which is not helpful at this point. Go away, sir. There's no reason for you to be there. Now we can do color equals red. Ta-da! So that's how you take advantage of CSS and scoping, which is really, really helpful when you have massive applications that have really complex CSS, that have UI components that are nested within each other and nested and nested and nested and nested, and you have to deal with some of the hardest stuff on earth. But this helps solve that problem in an elegant way. Then the next thing is that maybe you don't want to have some of this stuff. Maybe you want to take advantage of a CSS variable. I'm going to do it. I don't care. Which is color. We're going to call it color. And so this variable is called color, and it's going to fall back to red. Sorry that that doesn't look great, but here's what's happening. Our CSS is very tiny, and our background is either this value or this value if that doesn't exist. So let's come back. We've got red because that variable, that value doesn't exist. I'm going to say style equals color, which is blue. Ta-da! And that's how you take advantage of CSS variables and passing it into shadow rim. CSS that you define up here in the head will not pass into this div. So if I want to style this div, if I want to say, like, I can just do it here. If I want to say all divs need to, oh, I apologize, all divs need to have the color of red, and they need to be display inline block. Then this actually, fortunately, isn't being hit down here. It never is applied because of the scoping that this shadow DOM supports, provides rather. So that is a pretty quick version of what Stencil provides. I think I am now probably at my 30-minute mark, probably above, frankly. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Let me know if you have any questions. Super happy to answer them. I love this thing. I adore it. Helps me write great code. So give it a shot. Thank you.
Nice again.
Do you have any questions?
Is this like open source to go out and download it from someplace?
Yep.
Stencil.org or
Stenciljs.com.
stenciljs.com?
Yeah. Anything else?
How much can you do with the CSS variable?
How much can you do?
Yeah.
A fuckload. Seriously, a lot.
Because I mean, that was a pretty contrived, very small piece of what it can do. So can you like make modules and then just include modules in with CSS variables, or?
I do wish that you can do modules. You can't like apply a large block of CSS. You can only do one at a time, which is unfortunate. However, one example of something that I recently shipped on Get Flywheel was something that I'm going to gush about. Okay. HTTPS assets. Oh wow. I breathe heavy. Components, core, dist, flywheel.js. And then here I'm going to not open that, I'm going to do flywheel asset, and then color equals red, and then I'm going to do source equals illustration airplane, I believe it is, plane. This is, so this is going to be illustrations. Something that isn't working. Do you remember that hubbub about the link tag recently? That's weird. Rel equals spreadsheet. Ref equals variables. That's CSS. All right, so this is the CSS for flywheel that's, it's not working. Okay, so what I'm trying to display, I'm sorry I can't show it because I'm trying to sort of roughly run through it. What I'm trying to display is an illustration that can be recolored with CSS variables by just saying color equals red. And they're pretty complex illustrations. We have like 5, 6 different colors, and then you just say color equals red, and it turns everything into, and it just takes advantage of CSS variables. It's pretty cool. But there's other stuff that you can do with it, like setting CSS, like fonts, doing fonts really well. And it's something that I would love to see Zach Leatherman talk about. Content, like, it's really cool. It's a lot of valuable stuff. Okay, that's all. It's great.
Are there any community announcements? Anything going on that we should be talking about right now? I'll give you the dates. You got Rails Comp dates in front of me right now. 4/17, 4/18, 4/19. Rails Comp. Check it out.
Our own Michael Harold is speaking.
Yes. You do the punchline.
Oh. Darn it!
You'll be back for 420, so don't worry. Omaha's very own Michael Harold is giving a talk. His talk is titled, "What is in a Price? How to Price Your Products and Services." He sets that up with some pretty cool research that he's done for pricing products. And he can back that up because he's super smart, has a really smart economist wife as well. So if you run into Michael, definitely ask him about that. I'm sure he'd love to talk about that. But those are dates that I have in mind.
Also, Under Bridges to meet Jay and also have to talk there too. So.
You got accepted?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Especially,
holy cow, Omaha, coming in big. I love it. Excellent. Up next, Adam Lassek.
That's my boy.
Introvert? No.
No, I'm an introvert, please. Quite the opposite.
I don't know.
Don't hesitate to bring the mic closer to you.
Alright, sweet.
Speaking of components.
Alright, components are pretty big in JavaScript right now. They've actually been around on the Rails side of things for quite a while. I tried to figure out how old the Cells framework is. The first commit I can find of it was in 2008, but that was the transition from SVN into Git. So I don't actually know how far back this goes. Probably almost as old as the Rails framework itself. I'm going to be talking about the Cells framework. It's part of the larger project called Trailblazer that adds a lot of patterns into the Rails framework, although I don't know how I feel about all of Trailblazer, but this is one piece of it that I've been using, and I like it quite a bit. So Rails views have a problem. They tend to get bloated. We've all seen templates like this before. We've all probably written templates like this before. I know I certainly have. Rails views have a few common problems that I've seen. They tend to just implicitly share their state with the controller via the IVAR magic that gets basically the instance variables of the controller are just magically copied over into the view behind the scenes, which is really nice when you're getting started, but when you're building a pretty complicated user interface, that becomes a total mess in my experience. And then there's like multiple ways of passing data into partials. You can do it through IVARs, you can also do it through local assignments. And there's usually not consistency between the two that I've seen in projects. It's hard to know when to use what. And it's difficult to tell what the interface of a partial view is. There's no way to declare it, there's no way to set expectations for what sort of data you need to render it. You just basically have to put it on a template and see what breaks. Deeply nested. Oh, yeah. So helper methods tend to become a junk drawer, typically, because Rails by default just loads every helper for every single controller, and so there's no actual organization across them. And so because of that, people don't think about where the methods should live and how, what each part of the page or what each controller should be responsible for having. You can get around that by turning that implicit behavior off and then specifically loading just the helpers that you need. But once you're down the path of loading everything, then it gets really dicey to turn that off because you don't really know what's going to blow up at that point. Deeply nested partials are really hard to follow. You're opening one file or another, they can live wherever they're referenced from, so there's no consistent way to look up where they're coming from usually. Sharing partials is kind of tricky, especially with the aforementioned interface problems with partials. And because of all that, testing views becomes a total nightmare when you have really complicated views. So, like I said, I'm talking about a piece of the Trailblazer project called Cells. I've been playing around with this lately because I wanted to find a way to organize the back-end template logic better. And I've done a couple experiments using this framework, and I really like the results of it, and it's honestly not that difficult to use. So the basic breakdown of what a cell looks like is you have an apt cells directory, and you have a Ruby file that is essentially your view model object. This is following the view model pattern that you may have seen in other frameworks. It's fairly common and fairly old. So you have the RB file, which is the view model, and then you have a subfolder with the view templates that it can render. And those view templates belong to that view model and don't get used with anything else, and they live in one place. And everywhere you reference that view model, it uses that same template logic. So it's much easier to find things in general with this type of a layout. Actually executing them, you can do it a number of different ways. So the conventional way to render a cell is using the cell helper, which is added into the view environment by default. And you can just reference the names by a string or symbol, and you pass in the model, and then usually use, according to their examples, they usually use the shorthand syntax for call, as you can see there. But all three of these examples are equivalent. You can do it in whichever way makes the most sense for you.
I like the second.
Because it's longer. Because it's
Because it's explicit. It's just explicit.
Okay.
Might want to turn it down if you are closer to us.
Yeah, put some more notes. Okay. All right. So all the usual Rails helpers that you're used to are available within the view model context itself. Also the render methods inside don't even need a template if you don't want one. Like if you have really simple markup, you can just write the code for it right in the view model without having to use a template file at all. Let's see. So as in this example here, for instance, the first argument you pass in to the cell syntax is the model, and that's accessible as don't have a pointer. So you'll see references to model in there, and that is the first argument that gets passed in. And every view model has a model property. The property helper at the top of there is essentially just a special syntax for delegation. So it's saying that there is a message. You can send the message author to the model, and that will be returned. So that's just a way of saying, okay, I want this as a top-level helper because I'm going to use it a lot. That could be helpful for the view templates themselves. And as you can see in the body there, I'm using simple format, which is just a typical view helper. You can use all of the view helpers you're already using. You can also pass in additional options to a cell using keyword arguments. And those will show up as an options method inside of the view model. So you can pass in arbitrary options, really, to any cell. This is actually a bad example because with current user, you actually want to use they have a context keyword argument that you can use, which is specifically for passing in context of the request. And the reason why this is special is because cells are composable. So a cell can contain cells within itself. And the context that you pass into the parent cell is automatically handed off to the child cells without having to do that explicitly. So if you want to pass a current user in, you do that under the context key, and that'll just automatically propagate to all of the child cells within it. The framework is also really configurable. So you can set the top-level directory of cells to pretty much anywhere you want to go. You tend to have to do that inside engines, from what I've read. We haven't actually used this in an engine yet, but we probably will. But yeah, app cells is just the default. But it's Trailblazer, so pretty much everything about it can be customized to your liking. And finally, testing them is just that easy. You can just render them in the test, and you can just test the output directly. There's no view wire up, there's no controller setup that you have to do. It's just a function that returns HTML. So testing cells is so much easier than it used to be. But those are all the basic, simple examples. So I wanted to show you a more real-world example of what this looks like based on some pre-existing code I had. So let me. All right. This is that first commit that I could find for cells from 2008, but apparently they're referencing trunks, so this came from SVN. So I don't even know how old this thing is. Anyway, so I did some real last-minute anonymization of data here because I realized I had customer information in my dev environment. So this is an application I wrote for Lyconic that just, it's our way of managing our, it's kind of it's a service that connects our data to Stripe. So we can set up Stripe subscriptions for our customers, and it also has a user-facing component that allows them to do a self-service to sign up for the application, and it takes their credit card number and sets it up in Stripe and does all that sort of stuff. So this is just our a little quick and dirty interface I threw together to manage that data in a more reasonable way. So I'm just going to take this screen here, which is just showing, so the application is called Landlord, and the individual customers inside are called tenants. So I got a little bit cute with the naming. So I'm going to take this tenant screen, and I'm going to rewrite this top piece here that takes tenant data and actually turns it into HTML, and I'm going to convert that into a cell. This is, let's see, is that big enough? I think so.
Yeah.
All right, so this is the, should be, no, that is the index page. There we go. All right, so this is that page in Haml. I did some like presenter objects already. This is kind of a half measure on the way to a full-blown view model. I think I gave a presentation about that in the past, but this view model pattern is quite a bit better than that because it ties the code to the markup in a way that makes a lot of sense. So, let's see. So all right, this piece here is, we're going to turn that, or rather I did turn this into a cell, and I'm just going to demonstrate what that looks like. So, let's see, I started from, there we go. I started from this presenter object based on simple delegator, and I just rewrote it as a cell class. A lot of similarities, except like I don't have the wire up, and I'm not referencing the view object directly anymore. It's a much cleaner syntax where you just you write the code as if it would have been in a view, and it just works fine. So here, this is a much cleaner class than what I had before. And let's see, and also, all right, so this is the corresponding markup, right? So I have tenant cell here. And then the show in the show template here. And essentially the point of this is that you have one template per view model, and all that you should be doing inside the template is slotting values into markup. Essentially I want to get away from logic inside the template where at all possible. It should just be about putting values into markup. Sometimes you need to do logic to turn pieces on and off because that's harder to do if you need to manage the visibility of multiple things at once. But in a lot of cases, you can simply rewrite that as a helper method that returns nil in some cases, and just stick that into the template. And if it returns nothing, then it's empty and it doesn't render. So you can actually reduce a lot of if conditionals from your templates just by moving them into a view model. So I'm going to take this and replace the piece. So I'm going to show. Okay. So it's the entire row section is going to be like that. And now it's rendering with the cell view model instead. An interesting thing is that you can have multiple templates per cell. So on the index page, I can actually reuse the same view model and just create a different template for it. Right, so I wrote an index template that is used on the index page here, using the same view model but a different representation. So instead of doing a loop in the view template itself, another interesting thing that Cells gives you is you can, instead of passing a single model in, you can actually pass an entire collection. What was that called? Tenants Pro. And then here, you simply reference, it's using the index template. Show is the default. So you don't have to pass that in. If you pass something in, it'll assume that you're looking for show, but we're going to use index. And as you might have seen here, I added an index render method here, that just tells it it's rendering the index template. So reload this page, and it's using the same exact view model. Since I'm passing it in as the collection argument, it's automatically looping through it. I don't have to write that myself. So we have this one concept of a tenant, and I can create every representation of that concept, and I can use the same view model everywhere in the application that needs to reference it. And that's pretty much all there is to it. It's that simple. You can compose them together in an object-oriented way, the same way you would with any other class. And they generally you just pass data down into them. It's like any other component or any other component framework you may have seen on the front end. But you know, it's a powerful pattern, and this view model pattern can greatly reduce the complexity of our templates, which I think the Rails projects that I've worked on have all badly needed this. So I highly recommend just open a branch and just do an experiment. Find a V template that's really ugly and has a concept that's used in multiple places and just write it as a cell. It's actually, this whole thing took me about two hours or so in preparation. Actually less than that for this code, because it was simpler. The earlier version I wrote for this, for Flywheel, took a couple hours, but that was a more complicated example. I wanted to pick something a little bit easier to understand for tonight, but that's all I had. Any questions?
So the cell that you're inheriting from actually gives you the show method?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the show is wired up implicitly, because you need at least one for a cell. You can, like I said though, you don't need the template. You can just implement the show method and then just spit out JavaScript, and that's good enough. But if you want additional templates, you just have to write a random method for them, and you just reference them by symbol, and that's it. That's all there is to it.
You probably explained this already, and it just might be my misunderstanding, but cells exists in Rails already, or is that something you need to correct from this?
No, cells is a gem.
It is a gem. Gotcha.
Yes, actually, let me.
That was my bad.
No, I didn't really explain that very
No,
clearly.
you're good.
So I'm using the cells Rails gem, which takes the cells gem and it integrates into Rails a little bit. It does some extra work for you. Like for instance, by default, the helper modules wouldn't be mixed in because that's a Rails thing. This does that for you. You can also mix in additional modules into a view model, whichever ones you want. And then you also need to include the gem for whatever template system you want to use. It's agnostic about that, so you have to specifically include every type of templating system you want to use. I actually ran into a problem with Haml because my project is a little bit old and it needs to be updated. So I used Herb for this example, but there is also a Css Haml template system that you can use.
I think in some way, I don't remember where this was, while you were going through this, I saw that you can queue up CSS for a specific component. So like if you go into the cells template, you can add a link tag. The browser will dedupe that, and then that means that you, whenever you declare that, that CSS is used for that and included already, or magically, which is not magically, literally included, which is really kind of cool, so that you can only make sure that whenever you have CSS, or whenever you declare an HTML element, or a component, you actually get that the code that is needed on that page, which is actually really cool. It was, I think I saw it on the marketing page.
I am not certain what you're referring to, actually.
Yeah, I thought I saw it on the marketing page, but yeah, it just popped into my head for some reason that you can literally add a link tag to that component, and then that's the CSS exclusively for that thing. And it sort of gives you...
It's my understanding that Cells is concerned only with HTML, not with CSS at all. I might be wrong because I'm pretty new to this, but I don't remember seeing anything about that.
No, you're right. I'm thinking about it from an extra optimization that you can do for a cell is add the CSS only for that by adding a link tag there inside of the template, so that when it's declared, when you actually have that HTML that's rendered in that cell, it asks for that CSS for that cell. Like, that could be an opportunity there, which is interesting. I don't know if it's
I haven't seen link tags for style sheets loaded like that, but I suppose that would work.
Yeah, exactly. Like, pretty interesting.
Yeah, a little bit. That would make it a little bit kind of like how Q works, for instance, where you can declare the style. Yeah, this isn't, like I said, this is written long before web components were even conceived of. So the CSS stuff, this isn't really built to handle that, and that's one thing that the front end, like web components, are better for. This is for just rendering
Logic.
the markup. It's for constructing the Ruby code to render the markup in a way that is maintainable.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
But yeah, obviously web components are better if you have styles and JavaScript and behavior that all needs to live together. That's outside of the scope of this particular project.
With that being said, I think that they both can work together pretty well.
Yes, so this could potentially be a way of essentially codifying how web components are packaged on the back end. I don't know. I've never done anything like that, so I don't know what that would look like, but you know.
It's collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, if it's more complicated than simply dropping a tag on the page,
It's true.
this would be good. But yeah, generally use your best judgment about what to use for. Like, I don't think everything should be a cell. I think you could definitely take this too far, and it would get to the point where your views become so atomized, you're back to the problem of having to look up a million different files to find everything. But for the really complicated stuff, I think this massively simplifies. So, I think that's it for me.
Thanks for coming out tonight. Plenty of pizza, plenty of drinks left. Be hanging out until Isabel kicks us out.
Fantastic presentation. Nice. Sorry I missed.